Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack the material you send us and find the really interesting stuff inside.
And today, we're tackling Hindustani classical music.
That's right. We've got this pretty detailed PDF here covering the history, the different forms, the underlying ideas. And our job really is to walk you through it, pull out the key things, maybe some surprising bits.
So you get a good grasp of this, incredible tradition.
Exactly. Okay, let's dive into this soundscape.
You know, it's often said music is a universal language.
Right.
But it's fascinating how different cultures interpret that, how they build their musical grammar. It leads to such distinct experiences.
Totally. And this material jumps right in with the Sanskrit word Sangeet.
Yes.
It explains it's a joining, like an amalgamation of Sam meaning along with, and Geet meaning lyrics or poetry.
So Sam plus Geet, melody and words intrinsically linked from the start.
That feels foundational.
It is. And within Indian classical, you've got the two mainstreams, Hindustani in the north, Carnatic in the south.
And we're focusing on Hindustani today, based on this source.
Correct.
Wow, the list of vocal forms mentioned is quite long. Khayal, bhajan, tarana, Dhrupad, ghazal.
It goes on, but maybe more interesting than just the list is why they exist. What's their purpose?
Good point.
Well, the material points out many are devotional. You know, bhajan or kirtan for Hindus, Qawwali for Muslims, Shabad for Sikhs.
So music is really woven into spiritual life across different communities there.
Deeply. Then you have things like ghazal, more for poetic or romantic expression.
And at the other end, it mentions film songs are probably the most popular now, show how classical interacts with modern culture.
Absolutely. And I found the educational forms really interesting.
Oh yeah, like what?
Lakshan Geet, where the lyrics actually describe the raga being sung.
That's clever. Like built-in notes.
Kind of. And Swarmalika uses the scale notes, the sargam syllables instead of words. It shows a real focus on how the knowledge is passed down.
Plus all the regional folk music feeding into it.
Constantly enriching it, yeah.
Okay, so that gives us a sense of the big picture, Sangeet, and the variety. Let's dig into the nuts and bolts, the principles. It starts with swara, or saptak.
Right, swara. This is basically the concept of the octave. Sa shaja is the root note.
The tonic.
Exactly. Double its frequency, you get the upper sa, that space between them, that's the saptak.
And it talks about registers within that.
Yeah, three main ones.
Yeah.
Mandra, which is lower, Majia in the middle, and Tar, the upper register. And good musicians can even sort of blend between them.
What really jumps out, comparing it to Western music, is the flexibility.
How so?
Well, like in the West, is usually fixed at 440 hertz, right?
Yeah.
But here, the starting sa isn't fixed.
That's a key difference.
And maybe even more important, the gaps between the notes, the temperament, aren't rigidly fixed either.
Precisely. Performers can subtly adjust them. You have the 7 main notes. And their variations, making 12 notes in the octave, like a chromatic scale.
Okay, similar number of notes.
But the real flexibility, the magic, comes from sruti.
Suti. The source called them fine international differences. What does that feel like?
Think microtones, maybe? Subtle bends, slides, lingering just off the main pitch. It's not just hitting fixed notes on a keyboard.
Ah, I see.
These tiny variations, these srutis, give the music so much expressive depth. They're essential for bringing a raga to life.
And this isn't a new idea.
Not at all. The material mentions the Natya Shastra, an ancient text, talks about sruti over 2,000 years ago. It's fundamental.
Wow. Okay, so you have the swaras, the notes, which can be shaded with sruti. How do they form melodies?
That brings us to raga. The source calls it the soul of music.
Nice description.
And it fits. A raga isn't just a scale, like C major or something. It's a specific set of notes chosen from those potential microintervals.
Okay.
Plus rules about how you move between them. The melodic pathway.
Like which notes you can go up on and which you come down on.
Exactly. The aroha, ascent, and avaroha, descent.
Yeah.
But there's more. Each raga has important notes, the avadi, like the king note, and the samavadi, the queen.
So musicians emphasize those.
Constantly circle back to them, yeah. And then there are characteristic phrases, the pakad. Think of it like a raga's signature lick. Instantly recognizable if you know the raga.
It sounds incredibly structured, but also like there's huge room for improvisation within those rules.
That's the genius of it. And the material connects raga to nature, too.
Yeah, I saw that. Times of day, seasons.
Right. Ragas are often designed to evoke specific moods linked to those times, maybe peace in the morning, contemplation in the evening, longing during the monsoon. It ties the music very directly to natural rhythms and feelings.
Which leads us nicely to the third pillar, Tala.
If raga is melody and mood, tala is the rhythmic structure. It provides the framework, the balance.
The source describes it as a cycle of beats.
Yeah, a complete metrical cycle with a fixed number of beats keeps everything together, especially when you have complex interplay between musicians or with dance.
And within Tala, it mentions Laya and Matra.
Correct. Laya is simply the tempo, slow, medium, fast. Vilambit, madhya, drut. And matra is the beat itself, the smallest unit of time in the cycle. So tala is the cycle, laya is the speed, matra is the pulse. Put them together with swara and raga, and you have the core elements.
These principles feel so, well, ancient.
Yeah.
And the history section definitely backs that up. It paints a picture of Hindustani music as this amazing cultural blend.
It really is not just one origin, but a mix of ancient Vedic chants, the sophisticated Persian musical tradition, and loads of regional folk styles from all over North India and beyond. It's been evolving for centuries.
Even the ancient references, it mentions mythological figures like Ravana, Narada, Saraswati.
Yeah, like Gandharvas too. It shows how deep the cultural roots go. And early texts like the Natu Shastra first mention the term raga.
Right, and then the Dakalam goes deeper into scales, frameworks, permutations.
Swara, grama, murchana, tanas, alankara, all of these technical terms were being discussed when back then.
And it categorized melodies into jatis. What was interesting was that some jati names, like Andrairi, apparently referred to regions.
That's right. It shows regional styles were a thing even in antiquity. The seeds were there early on.
Then texts from the Gupta period mention instruments like the veena, mridang.
And fast forward to around 1100 CE, Narada's Sangita Makaranda. The source says its rules are quite close to current Hindustani music, but before the really big Persian influence kicked in.
Fascinating. And the Gita Govinda in the 12th century might be one of the earliest actual classical compositions sung.
Potentially, yeah. Then the 13th century brings Sarangadeva's Sangita Ratnakara, a hugely important text. The material notes it's kind of the last major one acknowledged by both Hindustani and Carnatic traditions before they really diverged.
And even that text shows some early signs of Islamic influence, like a raga named Turkish Todi.
Exactly, Turkish Todi, which sets the stage for the next big phase, the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire.
Right, this seems like a crucial period for cultural exchange, a real melting pot.
Absolutely. You had musicians getting patronage from the courts, rulers becoming interested in local music.
Which led to new forms.
Yes, a fusion of Hindu and Muslim musical ideas created things like qawwali and, importantly, Khayal.
And this is where Amir Khusrau comes in, a huge figure.
Immense. A poet, composer in multiple languages. He's credited with organizing parts of the music, introducing new ragas, Yaman Kalyan is a big one, and creating genres like early Khayal and Tarana.
And the sitar becoming prominent around then.
Yeah.
Linked to the Persian sitar.
That's the connection, yeah. But the source makes an interesting distinction about Khayal.
Oh.
While Khusrau was linked to its origins, it points to Sarangi, a court musician much later under Muhammad Shah. His compositions are apparently much closer to the Khayal we hear today.
So Sarangi might be the father of modern Khayal.
That's what the material suggests. It adds a layer to the history, which is great.
That kind of detail is really useful. And while all this court music was developing, classical forms were also blending with the Bhakti movement, right?
Yes. Figures like Kabir, Nanak composing in everyday languages, making the music more accessible, plus Jayadeva, Mirabai, others mentioned.
Then under the Mughals, especially Akbar, music really took off. Tansen.
The legend. Credited with big innovations, the stories about his singing, changing the weather, or lighting lamps, it just shows his incredible stature.
And the Gwalior court was important too, under Rajaman Singh Tamar.
Right, he shifted classical songs into Hindi, wrote music, compiled this Book of Curiosity, Mankutohal. Dhrupad in particular really developed there. It became a strength of the Gwalior Gharana.
Gharana. That seems like a key concept that emerged more strongly later.
Definitely. As Mughal power faded, patronage shifted to smaller, princely states. Musician families started cultivating their own unique styles, passed down through generations, the guru shisha, teacher-disciple tradition, often linked to a specific region or founder. That's the Gharana system.
And these Gharanas kept interacting with Bhakti and Sufi traditions too.
Yeah, it remained a dynamic mix.
Okay, great overview of the history. Let's circle back to some of those major vocal forms in more detail. The source focuses on Dhrupad, Khayal, and Thumri.
Right. Dhrupad is presented as the really old sacred style. Traditionally male singers, often accompanied by Tanpura and the pakawaj drum.
What are the lyrics like?
Originally Sanskrit, now mostly Braj Pasha, a form of Hindi, usually devotional, praising deities.
And the structure sounds quite rigorous.
It is. Starts with a long, slow, rhythm-free improvisation, the alap. Singers use syllables like anant, tam to really explore the raga's contours. No drums yet.
Okay.
Then it builds through more rhythmic sections, jod and chala, before the main composition. The bandish kicks in with the pakawaj providing the tala.
Hansan sang Dhrupad, right, was the main thing for ages.
It was. But
Yeah,
the material notes it almost died out in the early 20th century.
Really? Why?
Khayal became more popular. But thankfully it was revived by dedicated families, especially the Daggars and other musicians mentioned in the source. Dr. Sanyal, Pakpawakar, the Gundekshas, the Maliks. It shows real dedication.
And there's a lighter form, Damar.
Yeah, often sung during the Holi festival, still related to Dhrupad.
Okay, then Khayal. Described as more improvised, more emotional.
That's the general idea. It uses a much shorter text, maybe just 4 to 8 lines, as a kind of anchor for extensive improvisation.
So the focus is really on the creative exploration of the raga.
Very much so. While its deep roots are debated, like we discussed with Khusrau and Sarangi, it really came into its own by the 18th century. It allows for a wider range of emotions compared to Dhrupad's often devotional focus.
And both Dhrupad and Khayal are strongly tied to the Gharana system.
Absolutely crucial. The Gharana is the lineage, the school of thought, the specific stylistic approach passed down from guru to disciple. It's how the music maintains both tradition and allows for evolution. It dictates nuances in ornamentation, raga interpretation, performance structure.
It's like the living transmission of the art form.
Exactly.
The material also quickly mentions Tirana.
Ah, Tarana, usually faster, more upbeat, often performed near the end of a concert to create a feeling of, well, elation.
It uses syllables, not words.
Right, rhythmic syllables and sounds bowls used for fast-paced improvisation. The source compares it to the Tilana in Carnatic music.
And Thumri.
Thumri is considered semi-classical. It's lighter, more focused on expression, often romantic themes. Lyrics usually in Braj Bhasha, said to have gained favor with Nawab Wajid Ali Shah in the 19th century.
Then there's Ghazal, which we touched on, originally Persian poetry.
That's right, it became a major form of Urdu poetry in the subcontinent and think of Ghalib. As music, it's sung across a huge region, but in India and Pakistan, the most respected performers often sing it in a semi-classical style. Focuses on couplets, exploring love, longing, sometimes philosophy.
The source also gives a nod to modern forms like Ravindra Sangeet.
By Rabindranath Tagore, yeah, linked to his theater work.
Okay, so we've mostly talked vocal music, which seems central. But the source rightly points out instrumental music is huge too.
And perhaps gaining even more attention globally, partly because you don't need to understand the lyrics.
Makes sense. So what are the key instruments highlighted?
Well, there's the veena, ancient and important, though maybe less common today. The sitar is probably the most famous internationally.
With the long neck and gourd.
That's the one. Name linked to the Persian sitar. Flourished under the Mughals. Known for those sympathetic strings that resonate underneath.
Cool. What else?
The sarod, fretless, powerful sound, sort of a cousin to the veena. Surbahar, santur, even slide guitars get adapted.
And bowed strings.
The sarangi is key. Very expressive, almost mimics the human voice. Also the ezraj and dilruba, and the violin, which was adopted into the tradition.
Wind instruments.
The bansuri, the bamboo flute, essential, very evocative sound. Then the shanai, a double reed instrument, and the harmonium, which is widely used for accompaniment.
And percussion. Gotta have the rhythm.
Absolutely. The tabla, that iconic pair of drums, is central to most Hindustani music today, especially Khayal, since about the 18th century.
And for Dhrupad.
Traditionally, the pakawaj, that barrel-shaped drum, the source notes the mridangam is the related ancient drum, still primary in Carnatic music. Tabla and pakawaj are the main ones you'll hear.
Got it. The source also briefly outlines how a typical performance is structured.
Yeah, usually in 2 main stages. First comes the alap,
Which we talked about with Dhrupad, the slow, rhythm-free intro.
Exactly. It's where the musician really explores the raga, sets the moods, sketches out its characteristics. It can build in phases aladap, then jad, then jala, getting gradually more rhythmic, but still usually without the main percussion.
And after the alap finishes?
Then you move into the banish, or, for instrumental music, the gat. This is the fixed composition set to a specific tala.
So the drums come in here.
Yes, the tabla or pakavaj joins, laying down the rhythmic cycle. The musician then uses the composition, which has parts like stay and tara as a foundation for improvisation, weaving melodies around the structure, playing with the rhythm, all within the rules of the raga and tala.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from Sangeet, Swara, Raga, Tala, through the history, the cultural mixing, the different vocal styles, the instruments. Why should this matter to you, the listener?
Well, understanding even a bit of this gives you, I think, a much richer appreciation. It's not just listening to nice sounds, you start hearing the structure, the history embedded in the music.
You see how those ancient ideas, Shuri, Ragas, for times a day, are still alive and kicking.
Exactly, and you appreciate the incredible synthesis, Vedic roots, Persian influences, folk melodies, court patronage, devotional movements all coming together.
And how forms like ghazal or instruments like the sitar traveled and adapted.
It shows it's not a museum piece, it's a living tradition, passed down through Gharanas, still evolving. You hear the depth, the nuance, the emotional range.
And thinking back through the source material, one detail that really struck me, which we mentioned briefly, was that old tradition of linking the basic notes, the swaras, to animal sounds.
Oh yes, sa from the peacock, re from the bull or skylark, ga from the goat.
Pa from the cuckoo, ni from the elephant. It's such a beautiful, almost primal connection.
It roots the music in the natural world in a very direct way.
It really does. Which kind of leaves us with a question for you to think about. In our modern world, which often feels quite separate from nature, what if we tried to reconnect music, something so fundamental, back to the sounds of the natural world? How might that change how we hear things, how we value sound itself?